Hello everyone, it's Darren and GP Productions, and today we'll be kicking off our celebration of the Halloween season by spending the entire month of October going through one of my personal favorite horror movie franchises, that of which being the Child's Play franchise. To those uninitiated, I've only fairly recently done this annual tradition where once a year I'll celebrate the Halloween season by spending the entire month going over my favorite horror movie franchises. The first time I did this was with the Evil Dead franchise, and this year, with the release of Chucky Season 2 on the horizon, I want to take a crack at talking about my personal favorite horror franchise, Child's Play. Now, my history with this little foul-mouthed ginger fuck is a pretty complicated one to say the least. Since, as far as I can remember, young me was petrified of this rage and obscenity-fueled piece of plastic. It wasn't Freddy, it wasn't Jason, it wasn't Michael or Leatherface, it was this 3-foot-tall walking nightmare that haunted my childhood dreams. The reason for which is because I think when it came to me being the spoiled little shit that I was as a kid, I had a lot of toys growing up, and just the thought of some of these things coming to life and trying to kill me shook me to my core. It was only around 2016 to 17 when I heard the announcement of another Chucky film being made, to where I decided to finally stop being a piss baby and take a dive into the franchise I fought my damnedest to avoid. I binged through Child's Play 1 up to Curse, and that is when Chucky made his mark to me as one of the biggest legends in horror history. But all legends have to start somewhere, which is why we're starting this little Halloween extravaganza by going to the one that started it all, Child's Play. The original Child's Play released in 1988 and kickstarted this series with a pretty big bang. The film centers around a 6-year-old Andy Barkley who was probably just the cutest little shit you could ever have in a horror movie.
Yes, he said that Maggie was a real bitch and got what she deserved.
Andy, how can you say something so horrible?
I didn't say it, Chucky did.
Alex Vincent's acting isn't the greatest, but you can't hold that against him given how young he is, and later on he does show improvement. But in regards to future entries, I have free reign to talk whatever shit I want. Anyway, Andy receives a gift for his birthday, a good guy doll, but the more the film goes on, it becomes very apparent that there's more up with this doll than meets the eye. I know that when most people think of the Child's Play franchise, more often than not do people think of the protagonist that started it all, Andy Barkley. I feel he's almost as iconic with the franchise as Chucky himself, but in this first installment, he doesn't really do all that much. I'm not saying that as a bad thing, but upon my recent rewatch, it became very apparent that the major standout as far as protagonists go for this movie is his mother, Karen Barkley. Karen was played amazingly by Catherine Hicks. Most of the great performances come from her because you can really feel the dread, the terror, or the motivation she has when on screen. The film also does a good job of having her deviate from the typical non-believer tropes that are synonymous with the horror genre, because they don't waste too much time on her not believing Andy, and she plays a key role in stopping Chucky and pushing the story along in general. She's also in what's probably one of the best scenes in the entire franchise. Like, seriously, this scene is so freaking good. You can really see and feel the desperation Karen has, and Hicks does a great job at carrying it so well up until Chucky's reveal. I'll talk further on that scene in a bit, but there's someone else I feel should be acknowledged in this film, is Chris Sarandon as Detective Mike Norris. It really disappoints me how Karen nor Mike return in any future installment, because they were true highlights as far as protagonists go for this film. For the little of him we have in this movie, Mike Norris made a really great impression by having Sarandon bring in a lot of wit, charisma, and charm to the role. And there's not that much I can say besides he just brings a really cool presence to the film whenever he's around. Also, I'm not sure if this was intentional or not, but his nonchalant delivery with some of these lines is so unnecessarily funny to me.
Miss Peterson's dead, Miss Barkley.
What? How?
She fell from your kitchen window.
Going further in on Andy, despite not being the best kid performer, this movie does a really good job of making you adore this little kid. I can't imagine any other young actor being able to pull off what the movie does with Andy. There's a level of charm that Vincent brings despite his inexperience. And I love how proactive Andy becomes. Instead of a helpless victim, he plays his part very well in avoiding and defeating Chucky. But how could I go through this review without touching on the main man of the hour, Chucky himself, played expertly by Brad Dourif. Both in human form and in doll form, Dourif off-rip does an outstanding job as the titular killer doll. For the little of him we see as the human Charles Lee Ray, Brad Dourif from the get-go makes an everlasting impression for this character. The voice and animatronic work go hand in hand on delivering us one of the most iconic horror villains.
I said talk to me, damn it, or else I'm gonna throw you in the fire!
You stupid bitch, you filthy slut! Did you fuck with me?
No! Ah!
The puppetry and robotics have definitely stood the test of time, seeing as despite it being over 30 years, these still look amazing in my opinion. It's also crazy to think that even over 30 years of this franchise being around, that the consistency of Chucky from this movie onward has rarely, if not never, been changed. He may not be as over-the-top and wisecrack heavy as we know him now, but this is still very much the rude, foul-mouthed, despicable, totally not pedophilic.
Well, John, it's been fun, but I gotta go. I have a date with a 6-year-old boy.
Yep, totally not pedophilic Chucky we all know and love. This movie's pace and overall structure as well contributes to making it great. There was an apparent 2-hour cut of this movie that series creator and the film's writer Don Mancini worked to cut down to a well-rounded 87 minutes. I feel that worked well for this film because it never feels like it overstays its welcome and works as a serviceable and fun ride. There was also going to be a heck of a lot more Chucky, and I'm glad it was cut down because of the presentation and build-up they gave to Chucky. We don't see him in full for a lengthy portion of the movie, and it works greatly with how they handle the suspense, like the Chucky reveal. Despite the fact that we already know the doll is possessed, they managed to make it intense as hell given the revelation that happened in front of Karen. It's a tone and vibe I wish they kept for more of the sequels, but it does make the experience you'll get with this movie a bit more unique when compared to future entries. Something I also never really acknowledged until this recent rewatch was the amount of really cool set pieces this movie offers. Like the little cool Chucky POVs, the car chase with Norris, the voodoo doll scene with John. And I know this is a little off topic, but for years I have always found John's line delivery here so damn funny.
Because you're an abomination. An outrage against nature! You perverted everything I've taught you and used it for evil, and you have to be stopped!
As well as Eddie Caputo's house explosion, all display this movie's expertise in practical effects and amazing stunt work. Overall, 1988's Child's Play is pretty damn great. It has great practical effects and stunt work, the characters and performances are all on point, is structured and presented very well, and serves as a really fun and suspense-filled ride. Child's Play 2 is a movie that has been regarded to many as the pinnacle of the franchise, and is undoubtedly the best film that this entire series has to offer. And I don't even think it's better than the first movie. Hello everyone, it's Dan and GB Productions, and today we're going to be continuing our little celebration of the Halloween season and our Chucky marathon by taking a dive into Child's Play 2. Now, like I mentioned before, for years this movie has been regarded as the best in the series by fans. But for years, I personally couldn't always get behind that notion. That ain't me saying this movie is bad or anything, but the experience I had with this one after watching the first one, cause yeah, I watched these movies back to back for this marathon, I found that not only was this not as enjoyable as the first film, but also that the first film, at least to me, didn't really need a sequel. But before I go further into that, I want to touch on all the things that I really like about this film. For starters, Andy takes more center stage as a protagonist than the previous film, being sent into foster care after the events of the first film, and his mother Karen apparently being sent to a mental institute. Yeah, unfortunately neither Karen Barkley nor Detective Norris get a return in this film, and Norris doesn't even get a mention. A bit disappointing, but it gives a lot more room for Andy and Alex Vincent to grow. Given the amount of time that passed between films, it allowed for Alex Vincent to really improve performance-wise.
It was this bad man who got inside my good guy doll so he wouldn't have to go to hell. But then he wanted to get inside me.
Why, Andy?
Because if he stayed inside the doll too long, he'd be trapped in there.
He only sounds a tad dry at points, but it's still a pretty great improvement from where he was years prior. I also love how in this sequel, he's still pretty proactive in his fight against Chucky. In the first film, he wasn't useless, but he was still very much the victim that needed protecting. But here, it's so cool to see him be on the offense and go after Chucky for a time. The main supporting cast in this movie is fine. There's not much I can say for the foster parents other than Joanne's nice and Phil's a dick. The standout would be the foster sister, Kyle, played brilliantly by Christina Lees. Kyle is so damn cool. I love her and the relationship she builds with Andy. They have the perfect big sister and little brother dynamic, and it's fucking adorable.
Hey, want to hear me say your name backwards? Kyle.
I also love that once it's revealed to her that Chucky's alive, she never takes any of his bullshit. Like, he tries to boss her around and she still keeps up that smart-ass attitude, and it's really fun.
Step on it!
What's the rush?
If I don't get out of this body soon, I'll be trapped in here! What are you looking at? Floor it!
Get real, this is a station wagon.
Shit!
I also love this movie's visual contrast to the first one. In the first film, they did a pretty good job at the sort of dark and grungy look of Chicago. And I love how in this film it's a more bright and colorful suburban setting. The production in general takes a step up from the previous film as well, with places like the foster home and the Good Guy Factory looking really cool aesthetically. Okay, I feel like now would be a good point in talking about something I'm very half and half on, and that would be Chucky himself. See, in the first film, for a portion of the runtime, we didn't see Chucky in full until about halfway through. That I feel worked really well in playing with the suspense, especially the closer the characters got to the reveal. In this movie, they make the decision of just having Chucky up and about in full almost from the get-go. Now, it makes sense why they do this. It would be pretty redundant to play up with the mysterious factor when we already know the doll is alive. But to me, having Chucky be around so often puts a bit of a hindrance on the chill and creep factor for me. Chucky in the first movie wasn't necessarily piss-your-pants scary, but despite us knowing about the doll, they managed to toy around with the suspense and build up very well. So going into this one and having Chucky be so prominent throughout really does hurt the experience a bit for me, and also brings in a slight tone shift I don't entirely like either. I'm not going to say it goes over the top comedic, but it's very apparent that this film definitely just wants to be way more fun and enjoyable rather than trying to be scary. Again, I need to preface that this isn't entirely a bad thing, but after the first movie having that tone and vibe not being directly carried over into this one did sour my enjoyment just a little bit. But with that said, while having a lot of Chucky and a slight tone shift did hinder my enjoyment, at the same time, I can't deny that I have a lot of fun with it. I love Chucky in this movie. The voice work by Brad Dourif is amazing. Get used to me saying that in these videos. And the animatronics and overall design went through a great improvement. In the first film, in the face department, Chucky's face was pretty stiff at a few points, but in this one, the work and design they put into the face really helped make the expressions pop out and overall makes it my second favorite Chucky look. This is also where they turn up the dial on Chucky being the sadistic and maniacal little shit that carries on for the franchise up to this point. The one-liners, the crudeness, and the iconic laugh all make their mark in this film and perfectly represent the character of Chucky. Something I can't help but to talk about in this movie is the film's climax. Child's Play 2 probably has one of my favorite climax in the franchise. I adored the set design and aesthetic of the Good Guy Factory and the brutal mutilation that Chucky goes through. Cutting off his hand to replace it with a blade hand, getting his nuts stapled to a doll platform, cutting off his freaking legs, getting melted alive and getting his fucking head blown up. This is pure insanity and I love every second of it. If I'm being honest, it kind of makes the rest of the film leading up to this point a bit of a small drag on rewatch. Again, it's not bad, but everything before this is okay to good, until they get to the factory and it's just freaking amazing. Overall, Child's Play 2 is really fun. It had pretty good performances, really cool set design, great voice and animatronic work on Chucky, but I still struggle to call this one better than the previous film. For me, it fails to deliver on capturing the same experience as with the first film. I know it isn't really trying to do that, but watching both back to back, I couldn't help but feel that at the end of the day, in regards to it being a sequel, it at least for me isn't able to match up with what the first film did, and honestly feels a little unnecessary. Now again, I do really like this movie, and am thankful for its existence and giving the opportunity for the franchise to continue on, and to make me love it so much more. But after the first movie and going into this one, I really didn't feel that this movie really needed to be made. Well, This trilogy went downhill pretty damn quick, didn't it? Hello everyone, this is Down and Jimmy Productions, and today we'll be continuing our Chucky marathon with its third entry in the franchise, Child's Play 3. Yeah, if it wasn't apparent from the opening or the title of the video, I am not very fond of this movie. See, this movie, after the success that was Child's Play 2, released the very next year afterwards, meaning that all the writing, filming, editing, etc. all had to be carried out in just a couple of months, and boy does it show. This film holds the title for me and others as one of the worst in the series, and for pretty good reasons. The rushed production effectively killed this movie by not giving them enough time to come up with any interesting storylines, characters, and all around making this one a bit of a slog to get through. This movie takes place 8 years after Child's Play 2 and focuses on a 16-year-old Andy Barclay as he is enlisted into military school, where a newly resurrected Chucky quickly makes his way over to in an attempt to get into a new body, being the new young cadet Tyler. Firstly, this movie to me probably has the weakest supporting cast thus far. Might go as far as to say it's the weakest supporting cast in the franchise. It's packed to the brim with cookie-cutter characters, tropes, and non-interesting storylines to carry it through. There's this romance subplot with Andy, one of the few female cadets who, as I was writing this, already forgot the name of despite watching the movie a week prior. It's De Silva, by the way. You have the nerdy character Whitehurst, who is honestly just okay. There's nothing significant to write home about, and his sacrifice near the end of the movie didn't really do anything for me. Then there's the jock bully character Shelton, and the first words I used in this sentence pretty much summed up his entire character. And then there's Tyler. Tyler. Christ almighty, is this kid annoying. I don't mean to sound too harsh, but good lord, I could not stand him throughout this entire thing. The movie tries to play the naive card with him, in that he just kind of goes along with Chucky's bullshit until it's very apparent he tries to swap bodies. But to me, instead of them doing that to make him a bit more likable or charming or whatever, it kind of just ended up making me more annoyed with him. The only side character I really enjoyed was the barber guy, Botnick, because he has this creepy as hell obsession with cutting people's hair, and the reason he's my favorite is because he provided the most amount of laughs because of how campy and over the top he is. Then we have the two characters everyone's here for, Andy and Chucky respectively. 16-year-old Andy Barclay in this movie is played by Justin Whalen, and I'm personally not that big a fan. He's very bland to me, and doesn't do a good job of emoting with his line delivery, and sounds the exact same with at least 60 to 70% of his lines. Another thing I noticed is that Kyle is nowhere to be found in this movie. Admittedly, she doesn't really have a place in the film, but I would have at least liked a passing mention. This franchise just really has a knack for removing characters we like in the very next installment, doesn't it? Chucky, as always, is really good in this movie. One thing I don't dig is his design. I don't know what it is in the face department that I've just never really been into. But in this third installment, it also becomes very apparent that the whole get out of this doll storyline is starting to get a tad repetitive. They change it up a tad by him going after Tyler instead of Andy, and with that, I do like how it adds a new dynamic for him and Andy. Instead of him being hunted, he and Andy kind of have this arch enemy / long-running rival kind of thing going on. But not only do I feel it isn't utilized to its fullest, around this point is when the get out of the doll formula does get formulaic, because this being the third time they've done it doesn't really guarantee that anything will be different for Chucky than the last two times this happened. So I just end up not really caring as much. Alright, moving away from the characters. This film sets itself apart from its predecessors that had the grungy kind of look in the first movie and a bright suburban setting in the second. The military setting for this film does a pretty good job in making this one stand out, but to me, it really starts to get dull as it goes on. Nothing visually stands out until we get to the amusement park and the climax. And on that, I feel like I can sum up the worst thing this movie does for me. And it's that, as a whole, this movie was just really boring. A majority of the characters are either boring, annoying, or fall into very standard tropes, without trying to make them any more interesting. The visuals in this movie are pretty boring to look at, and the story sort of treads the same ground we've had for 2 films now, and is a poor attempt at trying to recapture the feel of its predecessors. All of that, to me, is why I feel Child's Play 3 is the worst Chucky movie. Hello everyone, it's Dan in GB Productions, and today we're continuing our Chucky marathon by going over the fourth movie in the franchise, Bride of Chucky. After the failure that was Child's Play 3, the Chucky franchise lay dormant for about 6 years before making its grand return with Bride of Chucky. This movie took the Child's Play franchise through a much-needed change-up in tone, story, and overall aesthetic. Gone are the days of Andy Barclay, for now, and we are in an era of Chucky where he takes a more prevalent stage as a protagonist. This movie centers around the newly revived Chucky as he is brought back with the help of an old love, Tiffany Valentine. After a bit of a lover's quarrel, Chucky retaliates with a good old-fashioned murder and voodoo spell, trapping Tiffany in a doll body as well. The two make a plan to go on a road trip to Hackensack, where the deceased body of Charles Lee Ray was buried, so they can use a necklace called the Heart of Damballa to switch into the bodies of Tiffany's neighbor Jesse and his girlfriend Jade. Like I mentioned before, this movie really brought a much-needed rebranding for the franchise. In my last video, I brought up how things were starting to get a bit repetitive with the whole get out of the doll formula. Now in this movie, they don't completely abandon that, but this movie does a whole lot to give us a fresh Chucky experience. This movie swaps out Andy Barclay, a character that pretty much ran its course with the OG movies, and introduces the iconic Tiffany Valentine, played by the lovely Jennifer Tilly. Jennifer Tilly absolutely kills it as Tiffany. She is a character that is really easy to love, even when she's not at her best. She's an amazing foil to Chucky in that she's very creative in the kills and craziness, but also has a compassionate side that's really easy to get behind. Speaking of Chucky, I adore Chucky in this movie. Between the first movie up to this one, this is the most fun I've had with Chucky's antics. This movie worked less to make him scary, but to put him in a more comedic light, and I honestly think it was handled very well. I also love this design. It's my third favorite look in the whole series. The stitched up design always freaked the hell out of me whenever I saw it as a kid, and I'd say it is probably Chucky's most iconic look. Chucky and Tiffany are a really enjoyable duo. Their relationship is amazingly demented and psychotic, and is one of the most enjoyable things, not just in this movie, but this whole franchise.
It was buried with my corpse in Hackensack, New Jersey.
All right, let's go.
Oh, sure. I'll steer and you can work the pedals. We're dolls, you dope!
Oh my God, what are we gonna do?
Shut up!
You shut up.
This movie pretty much perfectly handled the concept of Chucky of all characters having a bride and just completely knocked it out of the park. Even when they have their first falling out, they somehow manage to make you sympathize with Tiffany and perfectly shows how damn diabolical Chucky is. Chucky and Tiffany really are the most interesting characters in this movie. Not to say that the actual good guys of the movie, Jesse and Jade, are bad, but considering that most of the story is being viewed through Chucky and Tiffany's perspective, and in all honesty are the ones you're rooting for the most, it's just very clear who most of the focus was meant to be drawn to. But I did really enjoy Jesse and Jade. They serve as a really good antithesis to Chucky and Tiffany's relationship, and I really did enjoy their story of not trusting one another with all these killings happening around them, and it's really fun to watch. Outside of the four main protagonists, the other side characters were just okay. The protective uncle was meh. The cop guy, Needlenose, is a dude that you just love to hate and love to see get blown the hell up. And Jesse and Jade's friend David was alright, but I really do have to commend him for having the funniest death in the movie. This movie brings in an entirely new tone and vibe to the series that likely came about due to movies like Scream taking a more satirical view on the horror medium. With Child's Play 2 and 3, they were only slightly steering away from the horror vibe, but this one goes all in with wanting to be a comedic and fun ride, and it does a great job at that. This movie is, for me at least, the second funniest entry in the franchise due to how it consistently had me cackling throughout. There is one other movie that holds the crown as the funniest, but trust me, it ain't for the right reasons. This movie is arguably the best written thus far, and probably one of the best written entries in the franchise. Now, this ain't me trying to say that the script is perfect. There is a bit of corniness here and there.
You seem like really nice kids. It's nothing personal, or at least on my part. But
The money.
Disgusting. Shut up! Oh. Shut up, or I swear to God, I'll fucking vaporize you!
But for what it sets out to do, which is just to give us 90 minutes of pure, unadulterated, stupid fun, in my personal opinion, it succeeds. This movie also provides us with lots of really cool and really creative kills. I know that in this little marathon, I've rarely brought up any of the kills, and while most of them are really good, it's Bride that pushes things to a whole new level for this franchise, in terms of giving us really stylized and fun ways that these dolls cause chaos. Stuff like the waterbed scene and the kill with the nails were a real standout to me. Basically, with Tiffany came an uprising for really cool kills for this franchise, in my opinion. The soundtrack in this movie as well is a freaking godsend. Me being as much of a rock fan as I am, this movie's soundtrack was damn near made for me, and it rarely disappoints, especially on rewatch. The opening with Living Dead Girl just blaring in the background was some of the coolest shit to come from this movie. And Tiffany's little dress-up montage was so freaking cool too. Okay, so if it wasn't clear already, I love the hell out of this movie. I love Chucky, and especially Tiffany. I love this movie's entire vibe and aesthetic. The tone for this movie, I feel, was handled greatly for the most part. The kills get really creative, and along with a really cool soundtrack, are all reasons for why I love this movie, and personally think it was a great and much-needed reinvention for the Chucky franchise. Hello everyone, it's Darren at GB Productions, and today we will be going over the 5th installment of the Child's Play franchise, Seed of Chucky. Yep, we are continuing our Chucky marathon with the most infamous film in the series, and Jesus was this movie a goddamn trip. I don't really feel the need to talk that in depth on the film that nearly killed the franchise, but for those not in the know, the previous film, Bride of Chucky, ended with the dying Tiffany giving birth to a child after her and Chucky do the do. This movie's story is very hard for me to describe because it kind of jumps all over the place a bit. It focuses on Chucky's offspring, Glenn/Glenda, for the beginning of the movie, but after a while they kind of changed gears to focus on Tiffany's character a lot more, while abandoning some of the Glenn/Glenda stuff. It makes some of the film feel a bit disjointed for me. This movie goes heavy-handed on the meta parody angle, slightly akin to the likes of the Scary Movie franchise, and it does not work at all. I know Bride leaned a bit more into comedy, but in that film, I feel like it was executed in a way where it didn't feel like it was intruding on what was originally established to be a horror franchise. The shit that happens in this movie, either intentionally or unintentionally, feels like it's a part of a goddamn cartoon. The movie is also played with lots of weird writing choices that feel idiotic, ideas that aren't as focused upon as much as they should be, story beats with characters that come out of nowhere, and it just feels very sloppy. This is also the first Chucky movie to have the animatronic work not be as up to par, and to just have the overall VFX look horrendous. This film came around a point where using CGI was still becoming the norm, so the times they do use it just look awful. The animatronics are fine, but I just hate the designs they gave to the dolls in this movie. Glenn/Glenda isn't really pleasant to the eyes. I get that that was probably the point, but I feel like it still needs to be said about the old shit face. Chucky and Tiffany as well just look very off. I think they made them a bit too simple and just don't live up to their designs from Bride in my opinion. As far as characters go, there aren't any very noteworthy beyond our doll trio. But I would like to quickly bring up Jennifer Tilly, the character in the movie, not the actual actress. Yeah, I mentioned earlier how they went with the meta angle for this movie. Yeah, in this film, not only does Tilly reprise her role as Tiffany, but she also plays herself. I understand a lot of people being confused by this, but I've honestly just gotten used to it over time. It's actually the beginning of a nice little tradition in the Chucky series. Mancini will occasionally bring back actors in his movies to play a role in future installments that are completely unrelated to the previous character. It's honestly a fun little tradition that I'm looking forward to seeing continue. Anyway, Tilly's role in this is one that's very hard for me to hate. Especially with all the digs and jabs they make towards her in the story, I honestly can't help but love. In this, she also plays up the campiness performance-wise, and in general is just really fun to watch. Alright, so getting into the dolls, this is where the movie is kind of all over the place when it comes to handling its characters. Glenn/Glenda is a character that to this day I am very mixed on. Being what most would assume to be the focal point of the movie, given that this is called Seed of Chucky, is without a doubt the most mishandled character within it. The film starts off with them, but starts to lean away and places them in the background in favor of dealing with Chucky and Tiffany's shenanigans. The idea of Chucky having a kid was so wild and crazy that it was ripe to be a wild ride, and they just didn't execute it all too well. Glenn/Glenda is a character that is deeply rooted in gender identity, and that for a portion of the movie it's up in the air on whether Glenn is a boy or a girl, up until they come to the conclusion that they'd be both or undefined. Which is completely thrown to the wayside when they introduce this out-of-nowhere split personality Glenda that houses all of Chucky and Tiff's psycho traits. They dedicate so little time to both of these ideas that could have been really cool and interesting on their own, but end up falling so damn flat when they just try to mush them together. But with that said, I can't say I hate the Glenn/Glenda character. There's nothing I can say about Glenda because she's barely around, but Glenn I thought was okay, at least, and I am really looking forward to their return in Season 2. Tiffany is the character that takes center stage because a large part of this movie focuses on her trying to give up killing to set a better example for Glenn/Glenda. And it's honestly pretty damn fun. It's so funny to see how close she's on the verge of slipping back into killing as if it's a fucking drug addiction. The stuff they do with Tiffany is probably where the film shines in terms of it being entertaining. And just the bullshit she gets into in general is freaking hilarious.
Oh, God. Is it Redman's?
No, it's definitely not Redman's.
What?
It's definitely not Redman's. What an asshole.
What makes you say that?
Say what?
The Redman is an asshole.
I didn't say it. You did.
No, I didn't.
So he's not an asshole?
Yes, he is.
Chucky, on the other hand, is okay. He's the same old Chucky we've known up to this point, but him being a father is only really utilized in one scene where he and Glenn go out to kill a reporter guy. He doesn't really have a whole lot to do in the film, and as a whole, wasn't really used all that well. The only scene I genuinely love, and I mean genuinely and unironically love, is his epiphany where he realizes being a human sucks and would just prefer to stay in the doll.
As a doll, I'm fucking infamous. I'm one of the most notorious slashers in history, and I don't want to give that up. I am Chucky, the killer doll, and I dig it!
This scene also begins to lead into what is my favorite era of Chucky, and I cannot wait to talk about that. It admittedly does come out of nowhere, but it's so fun to see Chucky come to this conclusion of abandoning his pursuit of becoming human and just wanting to stay as a doll and do whatever the fuck he wants. Okay, so despite me talking poorly on the film's writing, the tone it goes for, the misuse of certain characters, I gotta say that I don't hate this movie. Yeah, it is definitely the most poorly executed film in the entire franchise, but you cannot tell me that this shit isn't entertaining. This falls into the camp of movies so stupid that I can't help but love it. Remember in my Bride of Chucky video when I said that that was the second funniest movie in the series? This is the one that I was referring to as the funniest because of all the bullshit that unfolds. This movie, despite being heavily flawed and nearly causing the death of this horror icon, at least managed to give me a wild-ass and enjoyable ride. And most importantly, is better than Child's Play 3, which admittedly is not even that high of a bar to beat. Hello everyone, it's Darren and GB Productions, and we have finally reached the big one. The film that made me fall in love with this entire franchise and probably my favorite Chucky anything, Curse of Chucky. This movie is so damn good. It marks a return to the horror vibe of Chucky that abandons the hyper-comedic and meta aspect of Bride and Seed and goes back to a vibe that is much more akin to the original film. I've been pretty vocal on how Child's Play 2 and especially 3 were not as enjoyable as where the franchise began. This movie perfectly scratches that itch for me in delivering a Chucky movie that after so long is actually scary again. The story centers around a paraplegic Nika Pierce, living with her mother who receives a good guy doll package in the mail. And very early on, Nika's mother is killed, and the film focuses on Nika and her family coming together, and Nika trying to piece together the history of her family, this doll, and the mysterious Charles Lee Ray. I seriously cannot sing this movie's praises enough. This shit is so damn good. This movie is the first to be brought straight to DVD and video on demand, and is a short-lived era for Chucky, only being about 2 films, Curse and Cult, before going into the TV show. This movie not going to theaters is an honest-to-God shame, but an understandable decision after the blunder that was Seed of Chucky. This movie also serves as a great-ass redemption for Don Mancini as a director. For the uninitiated, Don Mancini has been the main writer for literally every Chucky movie up to this point. But Seed marked his directorial debut, and we all know how that went. Mancini did a damn good job when putting this movie together because there was a clear and distinct visual style that was not present with Seed. I'm not going to go ahead and say it's some of the best style ever made, but it is an amazing evolution from where he left off with Seed. It going to DVD and video on demand also meant that the film had a lower budget than most of the other films, so they only managed to use one prominent location and set, that being the Pierce household. This is probably my favorite setting for any Chucky film, just by how gothic and eerie this place feels. I tend to really love horror movies that keep you enclosed in one setting because it gives off such a sense of claustrophobia and feeling super trapped. It's one of the reasons why I love the Evil Dead films so much. It also being set in this one place also helps enrich the horror atmosphere, which helps enrich this film even more for me. For the characters, we have Nika and her family, which are just fine. The rest of Nika's family and the performances are, to me, surprisingly on point. Each of these guys do a top-notch job at playing the shittiest and grimiest people. The girl who plays Alice is okay. Again, I'm not going to harp too much on young actors, but she was just fine. Not the best, but she was serviceable. Nika is probably my favorite new addition to this franchise. Fiona Dourif, the daughter of the one and only Brad Dourif, the voice of Chucky, does a damn good job as this character. Everything in her performance feels so natural, and I honestly can't get enough of her, and her performances only get better as the series goes on. Chucky really isn't in the movie a whole lot, but I love that they made that decision. It helps complement the horror vibe, and like I mentioned a couple videos back, it's a tone more like the first film that I wish was carried more with some of the sequels. His personality as well as Brad Dourif's performance is toned out a bit since the last few movies, but again, it's a change-up that I really like. We're used to Chucky being this squirmy, loud, frantic little fuck, but most of that I felt derived from his determination to get out of the doll at all costs. We are now dealing with a Chucky who doesn't care that he's a doll and is just ready to cause chaos in any sadistic way he can, and I love every second of it. It also again does wonders for actually making Chucky scary again, and toys around with a lot of the suspense in the film. This movie also takes us into a further deep dive into Chucky's past, which is something I do like, but I'm also very mixed on. I like that we have Brad Dourif actually playing the human Charles Lee Ray, a character that hasn't been on screen since the OG Child's Play film, but the small piece of backstory they gave him has me a little mixed. While on the topic of Chucky, I feel like it's a good time to go over my negatives with this film, because despite me loving this film to death, it ain't perfect, and it has a bunch of problems. Not big ones, but ones that need to be acknowledged. Firstly, the use of VFX like the last film is not very good. It ain't as bad as the last movie, but when you notice it, it is pretty distracting. Chucky's design as well is pretty odd. I don't hate it, but I wouldn't say it's one of the best. There is also a pretty weird difference in the face department with the before and after the scars are revealed. Like, the normal looks like he's a little coked out and chubby, while the stitched up Chucky look is very simplified. Not bad, just a little weird. Also, what's probably my biggest issue with this film is that the continuity with it is kinda fucked in more ways than one. So, in this movie we have the stitched up Chucky, the same one we've been following for 2 movies now. The one that is already fully human. But he gets stabbed and decapitated, and there's just no blood. For some reason. Also, going back to Chucky's backstory and him being pretty much romantically obsessed with Nika's mother just does not line up with what we've known Chucky to be like up to this point, and it especially does not hold up that much in terms of future entries. In this next point, I might have to get a bit ahead of myself, but I just have to bring this up. So this movie has 2 end credit scenes, one where Chucky possesses Alice, and one where he goes to kill Andy. So, in the next film, Cult of Chucky, it's revealed that sometime before the events of Curse, Chucky came back to life and found a spell to split his soul into separate entities. Okay, so that explains why we have 2 different Chuckies in this ending, but I have one question. Why are they both the stitched up version? I mean, we can assume the main Chucky, if you will, that we've seen all throughout this movie is the one that went after Andy, because we see him at the beginning of Cult of Chucky. Alrighty then, so where the hell did this motherfucker come from? Are there two stitched up Chucky dolls running around? If so, why? And how? Alright, this next point is completely separate from the negatives, but I just want to bring up that this movie's theme has to be my favorite Chucky theme ever. I know I didn't bring up any of the other themes in my last videos, so let me give you a quick little lightning round. Child's Play 1, great. Child's Play 2, iconic. Child's Play 3, mediocre. I don't even think Bride and Seed have one. Curse and by proxy, Cult are my favorite. And I can't even describe why, it just sounds so eerie and cool. Overall, Curse of Chucky is a damn good movie. It does a great job at bringing this horror icon back to its roots with a chilling and gothic atmosphere, really cool kills, decent and great performances all around, and manages to be an outstanding love letter to longtime Chucky fans. Hello everyone, it's Darren and GB Productions, and today we're going over the 7th installment in the Child's Play franchise, Cult of Chucky. Despite this movie, in my opinion, not being as good as the previous film, Curse of Chucky, this movie is still a shit ton of fun. Cult is surprisingly enough the most divisive Chucky film among Chucky fans. Some, like myself, love the hell out of it, and others consider it to be one of the series' weakest entries. I myself don't know particularly why, because I haven't been paying much attention to the discussion surrounding this film. So if you're not a fan of the film, let me know in the comments why, because for me, this may be my third favorite in the franchise behind the original. The story centers around Nika after being sent to a psychiatric hospital, after being framed for her family's murder, and Chucky continuing his hunt for her to add Nika to his killer cult. Firstly, I love the asylum aesthetic. It greatly contrasts the dark and eerie vibe of the Pierce household in the previous film. I understand some people probably getting bored of the soulless white coloring, but I love it solely because of how it makes everything, especially Chucky and the blood and gore, visually pop out. And again, having the film primarily set in one location, especially an asylum, still gives this film such a creepy air to it. This movie also probably takes the cake for being the darkest one in the entire series. Now, I know the franchise has had some fucked up shit, but the stuff like Nika learning about Chucky possessing and getting Alice killed, her attempted self-deletion after the news, the creepy warden sexually assaulting her, and I'm just now realizing that most of the dark shit in this movie is towards Nika. And Madeline's story with her killing her baby is just... wow. I don't even have a proper thing to say. It's just... wow. This movie as well manages to balance its tone way better than most other entries in the series. There was a lot of goofy shit that happens in this movie, but none of it really detracts from making this still a horror movie with a decent amount of mystery and intrigue. For the characters, Nika as always was great in this movie. Even though she isn't as proactive as a protagonist like in the last film, Fiona Dorff still does an outstanding job. The side characters are all fine. My favorites in particular were Patient's Multiple Malcolm, who deals with dissociative identity disorder, which they play around with in a really fun way. And Madeline, who, like I mentioned before, is institutionalized after killing her baby, and it goes to some really dark and sad places. The disappointing element of this film in regards to characters would go to the one and only Andy Barclay, played by the returning actor Alex Vincent. Andy made his return in the post-credit scene of Curse in a cool-ass fashion. And in this movie starts off again being a badass by torturing the severed head of the Chucky he shot. But he doesn't really do anything worthwhile afterwards, as this is still Nika's story, but it makes his grand return to the franchise feel pretty lackluster. As well as Tiffany, last seen possessing the body of the actress Jennifer Tilly, which I really have to commend this series for having the balls to make it very clear that Seed of Chucky is still very much canon to the franchise. She, for the little of her we got, was okay. She still maintained some of her campiness, which I myself can't really complain about. Then we have Chucky, who, in my opinion, when it comes to the over-the-top, raunchy, and downright despicable side of Chucky that was toned down in the last movie, this is probably him in his best form in the films. I especially love the new trick up his sleeve. For the uninitiated, in Cult, it's revealed that Chucky can now split himself into separate bodies, and I absolutely love the fuck out of it. Seeing multiple Chucky dolls run around and kill people is so damn cool. Sure, it is really freaking stupid how it was just from a simple voodoo for dummies spell, but for me, it's a really fun kind of stupid. I absolutely love each Chucky's distinct design and personality traits. Yeah, despite being one and the same, they managed to stand out personality-wise, and it's really freaking fun. This movie, crazy enough, also ends with Chucky finally successfully possessing a human body, that being Nika. And if you were doubting her acting chops before, just wait until she has to actually play Chucky himself, because her performance is literal perfection, and it only continues to get better. This movie also has a lot of really cool kills, like the glass decapitation, the warden's head stop, and Madeline's death, however the fuck she died, were really big highlights. With how much I love this movie, I gotta say there is a bunch of weird shit in it. Like, weird story moments that don't get explained that well, like why Andy has a buzz-cut Chucky doll, how Nika being possessed allows for Chucky to being able to walk in her body, Nika's very strange dream sequence where we see this off-looking PNG of Chucky, as well as her seeing flashes of Chucky's death in Child's Play 3, for some reason. This movie also ends in a really awkward fashion. I never tend to like movies or stories in general that end as just setup for the next installment, and this movie has a ton of that. With Andy being locked up in the asylum, Chucky in Nika's body, as well as Tiffany and Doll Tiffany apparently riding off into the sunset, as well as the return of Kyle in the post-credit scene. It all just feels like a little unnecessary promise for future entries, instead of giving an actual conclusion to the story. It's also unfortunate that this type of ending doesn't really go away for Chucky. Overall, Cult of Chucky is a lot of good fun, with really good performances, a visual aesthetic that is pleasing to the eye, a really intriguing and intense atmosphere, a ton of good kills, really good writing with characters that are for the most part enjoyable, a whole lot of Chucky goodness, and I feel is one of the best entries that this franchise has to offer. Hello everyone, this is Darren at GB Productions, and today we are going to be looking at the 2019 Child's Play remake. Yeah, I'm going to be like 110% honest with y'all. When I initially started this little marathon, I legit forgot that this movie was a thing that even happened. This movie was announced, I think, a couple months after Don Mancini announced that he was working on a Chucky TV series, which a lot of fans, including Mancini, felt was pretty ill-faced. Like, why announce a random-ass remake literally nobody asked for while the OG series is still ongoing? But that aside, on the lead-up to this movie, I was a bit more optimistic than most others were. They revealed they were stepping away from the Voodoo and Charles Lee Ray stuff and went for a more artificial intelligent killer robot doll instead. I understand many not being on board with something like this, but I really tend to have more respect for remakes that stray off and do their own thing, rather than try to do the same as the original, but worse. So, how did it fare? Yeah, I think it was pretty good. It's sure as hell a lot better than it has any right to be. The story isn't really anything special, since it is a remake. It for the most part follows a little bit of the OG story, except instead of the doll being possessed, one of the overworked staff flipped on the old evil switch before committing self-deletion. The movie in general I feel is a bit awkwardly paced. I think it was said that this movie was completed in about 6 months, and if that truly is the case, boy does it show. Story beats and such are executed pretty quickly, and most don't get proper time to develop or even resolve a few things. But I feel the main thing that shines in this movie are the characters and their relationships, and that's where the main amount of enjoyment you'll probably get is from. This movie kind of proves my notion that you can have a pretty generic and bland story, but if you have a bunch of really enjoyable characters, it can naturally play out and be pretty enjoyable. Andy Barclay is played pretty well by Gabriel Bateman. As far as giving us a teenage Andy, I like him way more than the one in Child's Play 3. You can really get behind some of the emotion he brings in, and overall does a pretty decent job. I do not like Aubrey Plaza as Karen, though. She doesn't match Catherine Hicks, and she doesn't really put in any performance to make it feel like she's not just playing herself. But on the other hand, I can get behind her relationship with Andy. The two do have really good chemistry and play off of each other very well. As well as Mike Norris, played by Brian Tyree Henry. Despite being a bit of a meh character overall, I think I like how they do his relationship with the Barclays in this movie way more over the original. Andy's friends all kind of suck ass, though. This is around the time when a bunch of films tried to tap into the kid-centric horror hype from Stranger Things and the It remakes, and it just does not work. Pug and Fallon are as cookie cutter as they come, and the random addition of that random black kid whose name I forgot just did not feel necessary at all. But what I gotta say is, at the heart of this movie, in terms of its characters, are without a doubt Andy and Chucky. Firstly, Chucky in this movie is voiced by Mark Hamill, and do I even need to bring up how cool that is? He plays it with a lot more calmness, which works really well in making him super likable. Yeah, they made Chucky likable in that you genuinely care about him throughout the film. It mainly works because of how they make him super impressionable and only becomes super violent when seeing the world around him, which makes it super sad when Andy has to do away with him. But Hamill also did a top-notch job at making this Chucky creepy as hell, which goes hand in hand with its really uncanny and straight-up ugly design. They just really did a good job at making the relationship between these two feel genuine, and I feel if they didn't, the movie would have sucked way more because of it. As far as the scares in this horror movie goes, I think this movie does a pretty good job with the horror elements. There's just a lot of blatant mindfuckery that takes place in the movie, like Chucky playing the audio of him killing Andy's cat, or displaying Karen's dead boyfriend on his TV screen. It's not directly piss your pants terrifying, but it does leave an impression. Practical and visual effects are all pretty good as well. The CG is a bit iffy, but it is used pretty sparingly, so it's not like it's plagued in the film. The kills are all pretty decent as well, but the scene that was kinda hyped up, that being the store massacre, could have been handled a bit better in my opinion. I don't know if there's any more that I can really say. The movie isn't good, but it's not terrible either. The story is fairly basic, but has a bunch of enjoyable characters, pretty good performances, visual and practical effects are all pretty on point, and as a remake overall, I'd say it's pretty good. It could have been a hell of a lot worse, and I really wouldn't be upset if a sequel were to be made. Hello everyone, it's Darren at JB Productions, and today we'll be concluding our celebration of the Halloween season and our Chucky marathon with season 1 of the hit TV show, Chucky. Yep, we have finally made it to the tail end of our Chucky marathon, and by the time this video comes out, the second season should be well over halfway through. And it's either a worthy follow-up or a messy disappointment. Season 1 of Chucky is about our titular doll after the events of Cult of Chucky, journeying to his hometown Hackensack, New Jersey, where he is taken in by a young Jake Wheeler, a middle schooler who lives with an abusive father, until Chucky decides to help him out in an attempt to make him his new killer apprentice. The first season is so much better than it had any damn right to be. The story and subsequent characters we follow throughout is really friggin' fun. This show brings in a plethora of new faces to the franchise, as well as old for the diehard fans. For the newbies, we have our main younger stars, Jake, Devin, Lexi, and Junior. Jake, our main protagonist, played greatly by Zachary Arthur, was a character that was really easy to sympathize with and get behind. With the story of his abusive dad, him being bullied at school, and his conflict with his sexuality, all topped off with a pretty good performance from Arthur, does a great job at getting you attached to his character. Seeing him venture down a brief, dark path being manipulated by Chucky, and the lengths that he's pushed to was really freaking good. Even though it does end up going nowhere, that is something I want to complain about later on. But overall, I really did like Jake as a character. Devin, on the other hand, not so much. Not to knock down the actor, because I know they're young, but he was probably the weakest performance-wise, and one of the characters I ended up caring the least about. The line direction and line delivery for me was kind of flat for him most of the time. It really felt that most of the time he just straight up wasn't there. Like he wasn't actually having these conversations with these characters. That's how flat it was for me. That also put a detriment on one of the most central plots in this season, that being Jake and Devin's relationship. Seeing them getting together didn't feel as satisfying as it should, because like I said, for the most part, it didn't feel like Devin was completely there, which didn't make the love that he had for Jake feel that natural. Scenes like their first kiss and that hallway scene are adorable in itself, but as a whole, it just wasn't executed as well to me. I really hope they improve on it in the second season now. Now, Lexi, played by who I think out of all the younger actors, she was probably the best. Which probably isn't a coincidence, since while this show was releasing, my friend reminded me that she was in another show I had seen. That being Daybreakers on Netflix. I honest to God can't remember how her performance was in that show, but I'm willing to bet that that experience helped, because I thought she was really good in this. She was great at playing the most despicable and grimy character who isn't Chucky, and I felt that she pulled it off. My problems with her, though, is that her character arc and her starting out as a maniacal bitch, only to turn a new leaf and consider Jake and Devin her family, was so half-assed in my opinion. The biggest thing that makes this not work is that they did too good of a job at making you absolutely despise her. I get they wanted to do that to show Jake having that push and trying to kill her, but I feel you could have done that without making her this downright cartoonishly evil. Junior as well was a character that was handled kind of flimsily. He's not even really that prominent, he's mainly in the background for a majority of the show until Chucky tries to move and make him his killer apprentice, which was what I wanted to briefly discuss. Even though the remake came out first and did this, it might be my bias towards the OG series, but I love Chucky interacting with teenagers here. It's a clever take on the old formula of the first two films, and it's even more interesting with the big idea of him wanting to recruit them as a killer apprentice. I already had a feeling they wouldn't commit to doing it with Jake, main character and all, but it's when Chucky went around to manipulating Junior is when I got my hopes up, and was eventually disappointed. See, not only did they do a poor job at us buying that Junior can be a killer, they also threw in a redemption arc that didn't feel earned, because he doesn't show any reason to have that level of violence, and no, his mom dying and dad being a dick doesn't justify it. It just didn't feel natural, and yeah, his redemption didn't feel earned either because we didn't see enough of him as a killer to even get behind it. I feel the need to preface that I don't hate any of these characters, it's just that outside of Jake, I felt the writing choices and general execution on them was just kinda iffy. Other than the youngins, we have a personal standout for me being Devin Sawa playing Logan and Lucas Wheeler, Jake's dad and Junior's dad. I felt he did pretty decently for the one episode we saw of Jake's dad, and we would periodically saw him as Junior's dad. Although that being said, I am looking forward to seeing his return in Season 2. Bree and as well as Devin's mom are a problem that I'll go into later, but as a whole, these new characters are all pretty enjoyable for me. Now for our legacy characters. Nika, who last time we saw being possessed by the claw-handed Chucky and Cult, accompanying her is Tiffany. While we also have Andy Barkley and making her grand return to the franchise, Christina Leese as Kyle. So these guys were used pretty sparingly, and while I saw some others have an issue with this, I for the most part didn't really mind. Since this story is mainly about the kids in Hackensack, but an issue I have is that it was only Andy and Kyle I felt got the worst treatment. Now, them being used sparingly wasn't an issue, but outside of that badass introduction where they shoot up the claw-handed Chucky, they didn't do literally anything until the finale. It also doesn't help that their performances just wasn't all that. Well, Christina Leese, for the little we got of her, I still felt did a good job at stepping back into the Kyle role. My biggest problem is with Andy. See, this is what I was referring to in the past few videos of me saying I had a lot of shit to talk regarding Alex Vincent's performance. Considering we have more of him in this than in Cult, I can say that in my opinion, Vincent's performance was just not really good in this. He sounds so drab and emotionless a majority of the time. And before anyone says that it was intentional because Andy has PTSD, I'm sorry, but if that is something that he intentionally was going for, congrats, you succeeded on sounding boring as shit. It's especially apparent when there are lines like this.
What'd you learn?
He screams the loudest at fire. Those screams were my favorite.
That are meant to come off as dramatic or cool or whatever they were going for, but came across as just try-hard edge that did not work well. And Kyle, I felt, was probably handled with the most disrespect, because not only was she barely used, her fate at the end of the season was just handled in such an unnecessarily strange way. Like, it's left up in arms if Kyle is dead or not, which leads to me talking about another thing, but we'll get into that later. Like, for proper context, in a scene where Andy and Kyle make it to Chucky's old home, where Devin has been kidnapped, Tiffany, before leaving him there, planted a bomb at the front door. Andy went through the back and Kyle went through the front, unknowingly setting off the bomb. Devin made it out, somehow unscathed. Andy made it out as well, but the story for some reason leaves it ambiguous if Kyle is even dead. Like, we see one of her gloved hands from behind a tree, so it begs the question of why hide her if she's alive, and if she's dead, which is very unlikely, then her character was just a complete waste. Anyway, alongside Andy and Kyle, we have the return of Tiffany and Nika, the latter of which by far has to be the best performer in this entire season. The shit that Fiona Dorff is tasked to do in this show would be damn near impossible to nail, but she does it almost perfectly. For context, after the events of Cult, the Chucky that possessed Nika is for some reason having trouble keeping himself conscious when in contact with blood. Yeah, I'll touch on that shit later. So it's kind of a back and forth on whoever is in the driver's seat, and it is so good. The biggest thing I have to commemorate Fiona for is the layer of performances she has to put on. Like, in some scenes, she's playing Nika, but in others, she's playing Chucky in Nika's body. And then there are instances where she's playing Nika who's pretending to be Chucky, and then in other scenes, she's playing Chucky who's pretending to be Nika, and do you see why I sim for this woman? Although, this show does something to Nika that even a whole year later, after the season is done, I'm still split on. So spoilers, as if it matters at this point in the video, but spoilers? After dealing with the whole Chucky and Nika switching in and out thing, as well as Chucky trying to kill Tiff, again, and her growing fond of Nika came to a compromise to stop Chucky from getting in the way. And that compromise was to literally cut all of Nika's arms and legs off. On one hand, I admire and respect that they had the balls to go that crazy and that dark, but on the other hand, my girl hasn't known a moment of peace since she came into this franchise, and now you do this? Mancini, you really are one sick son of a bitch. Anyway, Tiffany is in full force this season, and I think she was pretty good. Except for like the last 2 episodes where she was just kind of used as comic relief, but as a whole, I really did enjoy her this season. But there is something that did bother me. Now again, a highlight in her story is her getting tired of Chucky's shit and breaking up with him. But this is probably the worst instance of this, because not only is this the 3rd time that this has happened, so it kind of feels redundant at this point to do it again. But even after she breaks things off, she still kind of tries to continue on with Chucky's evil plan, and even gets pissed when Andy seemingly foils it. So, yeah, kind of weird. Tiffany, I overall enjoyed this season. Jennifer Tilly, as always, does a pretty good job. Then we have the title character himself, Chucky. And I'm just going to cut to the chase and say this is the best Chucky has ever been, best Chucky has ever looked, best Chucky has ever sounded. This show literally just perfected Chucky. I love that the show as well gave us the opportunity to get a deeper dive into Chucky's past. When it was announced we'd be going through the origin of Chucky, I was intrigued but concerned. Mainly because I thought they'd go the generic bully victim turned psycho killer route, but no. It's just revealed that Charles from the get-go was just always a fucked up individual. I also like that it still leaves a bit of intrigue that doesn't need to be further explored. And I love going through his entire life history, but the flashbacks started to lose me a little after Tiffany was introduced. And it didn't help that the lip syncing with Jennifer Tilly's voiceover was a tad wonky.
Want to order a pizza?
I think that's a great idea.
Nag, 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 Tip.
When was the last time that you took me out for a nice dinner and a murder?
But as a whole, this being a Chucky TV show, they did an amazing job with him, and I'm so hyped to see more of this little ginger fuck in season 2. Okay, characters aside, this show offers a lot in terms of visual style. I love the direction, lighting, and color that is used throughout. It just looks so freaking good. And especially the episode that was in the hospital. Seriously, no hospital has any right looking this goddamn pretty. The visual and practical effects as well are fantastic. The animatronic work on the doll is to me the best they've ever been, as well as effects with all the kills being amazing. They ain't all perfect, but when they get good, they get really freaking good. This show as well has a pretty well balanced tone. It has a healthy mix of fun, wacky shit, as well as intense horror. But it also does a pretty decent job with drama and character growth. For the most part. Yeah, something I've been putting off for a while is that, like Cult, there is just a lot of weird and unexplained shit that I can't really get off my mind. While I do think they have a good handle with small character drama like with Junior's mom, and character growth like with Devin's mom, this show also has a knack for having plot lines that go on for far too long, or some that end up literally going nowhere. For example, Junior's mom, Bree, in the first episode is seen having a sneaky little convo on the phone that one would believe is insinuating that she's having an affair. Cut to like 3, maybe 4 episodes later, to where it's just plainly revealed that she has cancer. And before we have any real time to digest or care about that info, Chucky just up and kills her. If they introduced that element earlier instead of dragging it out for an unnecessary amount of time, we could have had more time to actually care and feel bad about her death, further making Chucky seem like this diabolical little shit. But I guess not. Or with Devin's mom, where she starts to suspect Jake is behind all the Chucky killings, but she eventually comes around to trust him through learning about Devin liking him. And before they do anything interesting with it, she just up and frickin' dies. Why? What was the point? Not only that, but there are also just generally a bunch of awkward moments in the show. Not really bad, just very weird. Like Chucky when he was about to kill Lexi, but then he just didn't for some reason. We never get a proper explanation on how Chucky and Nika keep switching back and forth. Like, the getting knocked out part and regaining consciousness, I kinda get, but they never explain why whenever they come in contact with blood triggers the switch up. And Chucky's apparent evil plan throughout this season was just kind of weirdly explained. It's just kind of randomly alluded to that he needed one of these kids to kill so that it can complete a voodoo spell to possess an army of Chucky dolls at once. This is something I hate that some shows do, where they save all the important shit for the finale where it barely has any room to breathe. I feel if this element of the story was introduced earlier, it would give us a bit more drama and intensity to build up with the anticipation of if he gets a kid to kill, we're all pretty much fucked. Yeah, if it wasn't apparent already in this video, most of my gripes and complaints from the show come from its very awkward finale. Like I mentioned in my cult video, I don't like when an ending to a story serves as a shameless tease to a future installment, because shit just ends up feeling incomplete as a result. Like, with this finale, everything in it was just very poorly handled. The stuff with Kyle and Andy, the shit with Tiffany, the very strange movie theater massacre where Chucky's just rolling around stabbing people in the ass and they miraculously die. For some reason. And yeah, just as a whole, really left this season feeling a little incomplete. Alright, so even though I've been fairly negative for a portion of this video, I still cannot recommend this show enough. Despite its flaws, Chucky Season 1 has a really good cast of characters, who all delivered pretty decent to good performances, has a well-balanced tone that offers entertainment for those fond of the comedic and horror side of the franchise, all with a great soundtrack, as well as amazing practical and VFX, all make Chucky Season 1, in my opinion, a very worthy watch. Anyway, if you agree or disagree with anything I've said in this video, let me know right down there in the comments below. Also be sure to like and subscribe. This is Darren at GME Productions, and take care.